Sign the documents, old man, or you'll regret it, his grandson had been threatening for months. But when he burst into the house and saw his father, whom he hadn't seen in 15 years, sitting at the table, his legs gave way. The blood on the white roses looked almost natural in the flickering light of the old street lamp. Miguel Oliveira stood barefoot on the cold garden path he and Elena had laid with their own hands 40 years ago, clutching a crumpled note in hands trembling with rage. The words, scrawled in a rough, messy hand, burned his eyes like hot coals. Final warning. Sell the house or regret it. The 68-year-old widower slowly sank to his knees before the ravaged flower bed, not caring that the dew was soaking his pajama pants. His beloved white roses, the same ones he and Elena had planted on their silver wedding anniversary, lay trampled in the dirt. Their delicate petals were scattered across the garden like confetti after some nightmarish celebration of death and destruction. Every severed bloom felt like a knife to the heart. Miguel remembered how Elena used to smile as she explained the secrets of proper planting, how they had watered the young shoots together, how she rejoiced at their first bloom. "These roses will outlive us both," she had said then, not knowing how terrifyingly prophetic her words would turn out to be. "Señor Miguel." A woman's voice pierced the silence of the night, breaking the morning hush of the devastated garden. Carmen Valencia had run out of her small house in a checkered flannel robe, her hair tousled with sleep, her brown eyes filled with the alarm familiar to nurses at the sight of another's pain. The 29-year-old woman had lived next door for just a year, but in that time had learned to recognize the sounds of distress better than many lifelong residents. The old man's groans and sobs had awakened the entire street, echoing off the neighboring walls. "What happened?" She ran to him, and her heart clenched at the sight of his face. Miguel's eyes, usually clear and full of the dignity earned through years of honest living, were now clouded with tears. He looked broken, lost, as though he had just lost the last thing tying him to life. In his gaze was the same despair Carmen had only seen in terminal patients who knew the battle was over. "They destroyed Elena's roses," he whispered, pointing with a trembling hand at the mangled bushes. His voice cracked at his late wife's name. She loved them so much, said they reminded her of a wedding dress. Carmen knelt beside him, not caring that her robe was getting soaked with dirt and dew. She carefully examined the damage. Her trained medical eye quickly registered the systematic nature of the destruction. This wasn't some random teenage prank or the result of drunken vandalism. Someone had methodically, almost surgically, snipped each flower with scissors or pruning shears, then stomped them into the ground with heavy boots. The roots had been yanked out with such force that small craters formed, and the soil was churned like a hurricane had swept through. This was a message, written in the language of cruelty and designed for maximum psychological trauma. "Who could have done this?" she asked softly, though suspicion was already forming in her mind. Miguel slowly opened his hand and revealed the note. The paper was coarse, cheap, the kind sold at a nearby kiosk. The ink had smeared in his sweaty palm, leaving ominous blotches. "Probably the same people who want my house at any cost," he said, voice quivering with suppressed fury and despair. "They think they can break me with threats, force me to sell what means more to me than life itself." Over the past 3 months, representatives from the construction company Nuevo Horizonte had visited Miguel 7 times, offering increasingly generous sums for his house. At first, the visits were polite, almost friendly. Young men in expensive suits spoke grandly of development plans, showed glossy brochures with sleek new buildings, and promised triple the market value for his land. But when Miguel declined politely but firmly, saying the house was his whole life, their tone changed. The representatives grew more persistent, their smiles more strained, their arguments more aggressive. They talked about how dangerous it was for an elderly man to live alone in such a big house, hinting at potential accidents or security issues. Then came the oddities. Silent phone calls at night, where the only sound was heavy breathing. Accidental break-in attempts that left scratch marks on the locks. Suspicious people in dark cars parked for hours across the street, watching his every move. Last week, the project director himself had come, a man in his 50s wearing an expensive Italian suit, with cold gray eyes and a practiced smile. Victor Mendez spoke in a soft, almost paternal tone about how dangerous it is for elderly people to live alone in such big houses, especially with undesirable elements about. His gaze drifted over family photos on the walls with the appraising look of a man sizing up merchandise. "You have to go to the police," Carmen urged, helping Miguel to his feet. "This isn't just pressure anymore, this is criminal, threats and property damage. It's a serious offense." "And tell them what?" Miguel scoffed bitterly, brushing the dirt from his knees. "That someone cut my flowers? Officer Garcia will laugh and tell me to build a taller fence. If I start talking about the construction company, he'll say it's just business negotiations." Carmen understood his doubts. In a small town where everyone knew everyone, the police often turned a blind eye to business conflicts, especially when powerful people were involved. And judging by the scale of its operations, Nuevo Horizonte clearly had deep ties to the local government. But the company wasn't Miguel's only concern. Just yesterday, his grandson Ramon had come by again, and their argument had ended in the worst shouting match in years. The boy had demanded he sell the house, spoke of serious debts, and issued threats. Could Ramon have been involved in the night's destruction? Could his own grandson, the boy he'd raised after Javier's disappearance, have stooped to such tactics? Carmen felt a surge of anger in her chest. She had overheard those threats herself, last night as she returned from work. The young man had shouted at the old man and acted aggressively. "Don Miguel," she said, struggling to contain her outrage. "I have to tell you something. Last night, I heard your grandson yelling at you. He threatened you. Maybe it's time to consider that he—" "No," Miguel cut her off sharply. "Ramon is a good boy. He's just in a tough spot. He would never hurt me." But in the old man's eyes, Carmen saw the doubt he was trying to hide, even from himself. "Senor Miguel," Carmen gently took his arm, feeling how his body trembled. "Come inside. I'll make you some tea with valerian and lemon balm, and you can tell me everything. In the morning, we'll go to the police, no matter what the officer says." The old man looked around his garden, his life's work, created with his beloved wife over decades of shared love and labor. Every tree, every flower bed, every path held a memory. There was the old apple tree where they celebrated their children's birthdays. The gazebo he had built with his own hands for summer evenings with Elena. The little fountain where she liked to read on hot days. And now someone wanted to take that all away, destroy the last ties to his past happiness. "All right," he said quietly, but with a note of resolve. "But first, I want to collect the petals. Elena would never forgive me if I left her roses to die on the ground. She always said flowers have souls, and you have to treat them with respect." For the next hour, they crawled through the garden with flashlights, gathering the mutilated petals into a basket. Carmen helped silently, understanding this was more than cleanup, it was a farewell ritual. When they finished, the basket was full of broken flowers, and tears glittered on Miguel's cheeks. "Tomorrow, I'll plant new ones," he whispered. "Elena taught me that every death brings new life. But these flowers, they were special." Ramon Oliveira sat in his beat-up Toyota 2 blocks from his grandfather's house, trying to steady the shaking in his hands. On the cracked screen of his phone glowed the name Santiago Rodriguez, the man he owed $250,000 to. "Where's my money, Ramon?" The voice was soft but menacing. "Just a little more time, Santiago," Ramon hated the pleading note in his voice. "I almost convinced my grandpa." "You're out of time," Steele entered the man's tone. "I drove by your grandpa's house today. Beautiful garden. Shame if something were to happen to it." Ramon understood the message. Santiago had orchestrated the destruction. "Leave him alone. He has nothing to do with this. Family is sacred, Ramon. When one doesn't pay, everyone pays." Santiago paused. "You have 3 days. Either the money, the cash, or signed documents for the house. No third option. And if he refuses? Then you lose everything, your grandfather, your mother, your sister in America. My people can reach them anywhere." The line went dead. Ramon slammed his fist against the steering wheel. How had it come to this? It all started with a dream of opening his own bar. He invested his savings, took out loans, but the bar failed within 3 months. He had to borrow from private lenders at high interest. When his debt hit $70,000, a friend pointed him to the Golden Horseshoe Casino. He won $50,000 the first night, but kept playing. By morning, it was all gone, plus another $70,000 in losses. Within a month, he owed $200,000. When he tried to stop gambling, Santiago's men came and made it clear debts must be paid by any means. Now, sitting in the car, Ramon wondered how to make his grandfather sell the house that held his entire life. The phone rang again. This time, it was his mother. "Did you see your grandfather?" Isabel didn't waste time on greetings. "Yes, Mom." "He refuses." Then act more decisively. Her voice now had a manic edge. "That house could solve all our problems. It's way too big for an old man. He shouldn't be thinking only about himself. You need money. And my medications cost a fortune." Isabel had suffered from bipolar disorder ever since her husband disappeared. Treatment was expensive, and that only added to Ramon's burdens. "I'll think about it, Mom," he sighed. "Think faster. Time doesn't wait." When the call ended, Ramon pulled out a flask of whiskey and took a swig. His grandfather's face swam before his eyes, the man who had taken the place of his father and had never once refused to help him. He shouldn't have treated him that way. But he had no choice. Santiago wasn't bluffing. After Ramon's latest visit, Miguel sat in his armchair, unable to calm down. His grandson had demanded, once again, that he sell the house, but this time he had crossed the line. He had started smashing furniture, knocked over a chair, slammed his fist on the table. "Sign the papers, old man, or you'll regret it." Those words still rang in Miguel's ears. He stared at the photo of Elena on the mantel for a long time. How could he betray their shared memories? How could he sell the house where they had lived for half a century? And why was his grandson acting with such cruelty? Had he really raised him to be this way? Miguel couldn't believe it. He was tormented by hurt, guilt, and other painful emotions he couldn't suppress, no matter how hard he tried. Suddenly, his heart began to race. A crushing pain spread through his chest. Miguel tried to calm himself, but the anxiety only intensified. He stood and walked outside, into the garden, where he had always found peace among Elena's roses. The night air was cool. Miguel slowly walked along the familiar paths toward the white rosebed, the very place that had been desecrated days earlier. The young shoots he had planted to replace the destroyed flowers were still taking root. "Elena," he whispered, sinking to his knees in front of the new flower bed. "What should I do? The boy is desperate, but how can I give up our home?" Suddenly, a sharp pain pierced his chest, as if someone had gripped his heart in an iron vise. Miguel clutched his chest, gasping for air, but his lungs wouldn't fill. The world spun around him. His legs gave out. As he fell, he hit his left hip on the stone edge of the flower bed. The crack of bone echoed through the night. The pain was so intense it drowned out everything else. Miguel lay on the ground, feeling his strength drain away. He tried to call for help, but his voice was too weak. "Help," he whispered into the darkness. "Elena." Time dragged painfully slow. He drifted in and out of consciousness, pain in his hip jolting him awake each time. It felt like an eternity before he finally heard footsteps. "Señor Miguel." Carmen's voice rang out as she ran toward him. She had just returned from her night shift and noticed the front door ajar, then saw the old man lying in the garden. "My God, what happened?" She dropped to her knees beside him, quickly checking his pulse and breathing. "Señor Miguel, can you hear me?" "Carmen," he smiled faintly. "I think I fell." "Don't move." "You might have a fracture," Carmen said, already dialing emergency services. "Help is on the way." "I don't want to go to the hospital," Miguel murmured. I want to stay in the garden with Elena. You need medical help, Carmen said firmly, covering him with her jacket. Elena is always with you, wherever you are. The ambulance arrived within 15 minutes. The medics quickly diagnosed a fractured hip and a heart attack. At the hospital, Miguel was rushed into surgery. Carmen waited in the corridor all night. She kept trying to reach Ramon, but he didn't answer. Where is he when he's needed most? She muttered, dialing again and again. At dawn, a surgeon approached her. The surgery was successful, he said. But at his age, recovery will take time. And he'll need to monitor his heart closely. Will he survive? We hope so. But he'll need a lot of care and support. When Miguel was moved to a room, Carmen sat at his bedside. The old man was pale and weak but conscious. Thank you for finding me, he whispered. I'm always here, Señor Miguel. The next day, a taxi pulled up outside the hospital, and a young man stepped out holding a bouquet of white roses. Carmen recognized him instantly. It was Ramon, the same man who had treated his grandfather so harshly. He was about to enter the room when Carmen blocked his path. She crossed her arms and stared at him silently. My grandfather, Ramon mumbled, clutching the bouquet. I heard he was in the hospital. Oh, you heard, did you? Carmen's voice dripped with sarcasm. Where were you when your grandfather was lying alone in the garden with a broken hip? When his heart nearly gave out from grief? When I called you all night and you didn't even bother to answer? Who are you? A neighbor of Señor Miguel. I found him in the garden. I brought him to the hospital. I stayed with him through it all, doing what you should have done. Don't talk to me like that, Ramon whispered, looking lost. He liked this woman, but her tone made him feel like scum. I will talk like that. Carmen snapped, her eyes blazing. I heard your threats and cruel demands. Sign the papers or you'll regret it. Remember those words? Is that how you treat an elderly man? Your own family? Ramon paled. I didn't mean to. Didn't mean to what? Push him into a heart attack? Make him suffer? Carmen stepped closer. Do you know what he was doing the night before the attack? Sitting in the garden among your grandmother's ruined roses, crying. Crying because his own grandson was threatening him. You don't understand. I understand enough. Señor Miguel dedicated his life to his family, and now instead of love and care, he gets blackmail and threats. Do you even realize your actions could have killed him? A man his age can't survive stress like that. And yet you kept coming, pressuring, demanding, threatening. Ramon stood with his head lowered, and Carmen saw tears streaming down his face. But her anger was too strong. And don't you dare start telling me about your problems, she finished. We all have problems. Not everyone solves them by tormenting helpless old men. I brought flowers, Ramon said quietly, extending the bouquet. White roses. The ones he loves. Leave them and go, Carmen said coldly. Señor Miguel needs peace, not more trauma. Ramon left the flowers and headed for the exit, but turned at the door. I didn't mean for it to turn out like this, he said in a trembling voice. I don't know what to do anymore. With that, he walked out, leaving behind a heavy silence. You were too harsh on him, said the doctor nearby. I don't think so, Carmen replied. That young man needs to understand his actions have consequences. But deep down, doubt had already begun to creep in. Something in Ramon's eyes, and his desperation, hinted that the situation was far more complicated than it seemed. The next day, a sleek black car pulled up to the hospital. A man stepped out, dressed in an elegant gray suit, silver-haired, composed, with the weary eyes of someone who had seen too much in life. Carmen was on duty at the reception desk when he approached. I'd like to visit Miguel Oliveira, he said in a quiet but steady voice. Are you a relative? The nurse asked. Yes. I'm his son. Carmen's head snapped up. His son? But Miguel's son had gone missing 15 years ago. She'd heard the tragic story from many neighbors, how Javier Oliveira had supposedly died in a car accident somewhere in Colombia, leaving behind a wife and 2 children. "Sir," she said as she walked over, "there might be some mistake. Senor Miguel did have a son, but he died 15 years ago," the man finished for her. "Yes, I've heard that version." He looked her in the eyes, and there was so much pain there that Carmen instinctively stepped back. "But as you can see, the rumors of my death were greatly exaggerated." "Javier," she whispered. "Yes. Javier Oliveira. And I need to see my father. Immediately." Carmen led him to the room, where Miguel was dozing after another round of tests. When the old man opened his eyes and saw the man standing beside his bed, his expression shifted from disbelief to shock to a joy Carmen had never seen before. "Javier?" Miguel whispered. "Is it really you?" "Yes, Dad. It's me. But how is this possible? You disappeared. They told us you were dead. Isabel even has a death certificate. The certificate is fake. I paid for it to protect the family." Javier stepped closer to the bed and took his father's hand in his. "Forgive me, Papa. Forgive me for all these years of pain and uncertainty." Carmen stood at the door, unable to enter, yet unable to leave. What she was witnessing felt impossible: a resurrection, a return of the lost, the healing of old wounds. Javier began telling his story slowly, choosing his words carefully, as if each memory caused him physical pain. His voice trembled at times, and he often paused to gather his thoughts and strength before continuing. 15 years ago, I was working as lead engineer at Ernesto Morales' construction company, Constructive Solutions, he began, gazing out the hospital window at the city skyline. I thought it was an honest, decent business. We were building residential complexes, malls, schools, hospitals. Everything seemed perfectly legal and even socially beneficial. Carmen quietly sat in a chair by the door, sensing that what she was about to hear was important. Miguel lay with his eyes closed, but she could tell he was listening intently to every word his son said. "Morales seemed like a respectable businessman," Javier continued. "But over time, I noticed that government contracts were priced several times higher than market rates. The money passed through a chain of shell companies, and a portion of it conveniently disappeared at each stage." Miguel frowned as he listened. He had never fully trusted Morales. There was something in the man's eyes that had always unsettled him, but he hadn't imagined it was this serious. The turning point came one winter night when I accidentally overheard something I wasn't supposed to. Javier's voice dropped to a whisper. I had stayed late at the office, working on a new school project. Morales was having a meeting in his office. "What did you hear?" "Figures. Names. They were discussing a scheme to launder government funds intended for a social housing program. 20 million pesos were meant to build homes for low-income families, but instead, they planned to build a luxury complex and sell the apartments at full market price." Javier ran a hand through his hair. "That's when I realized our company wasn't just involved, it was the central hub of a massive corruption scheme. Tens of millions were laundered through fake contracts and shell firms. And I had unknowingly helped by designing the projects and signing off on documents." "So what did you do?" Miguel asked. "At first, nothing. I was in shock. I didn't know what to do. My family, my friends, my routine, they all held me back. I told myself it wasn't my problem, that I was just a technician doing his job. But something changed. Then they killed Carlos Vega, our chief accountant." Javier's voice faltered. "Do you remember him, Papa?" His daughter Anna was in the same class as Ramon. A quiet, decent man who always did his job honestly. "I remember Carlos. He was a good man. They said he was killed by robbers near his home." "There were no robbers," Javier said, his fists clenching. "Carlos accidentally found documents proving the money laundering scheme. A week before he was murdered, he came to my house and showed them to me, along with other evidence he had gathered over a long time. And he wanted to go to the police? To the district attorney's office. Carlos was naive. He genuinely believed in justice. He said he couldn't stay silent, knowing that money meant for poor families was being stolen by rich crooks. Carmen shivered. The story was growing more terrifying by the minute. And what happened next? The day after Carlos's funeral, two men came to my house. Javier closed his eyes, as if to block out the memory. Polite men in expensive suits. Said they were from the company's security department. What did they say? That they knew about my conversation with Carlos. That they knew where Ramon went to school number 7, class 10B. That Isabel worked in the tax office, room 205. That you, Papa, usually went to the market on Tuesdays and Fridays around 10 in the morning. Miguel went pale. They threatened the family? They didn't threaten. They informed, Javier said bitterly. Then they politely offered me a choice. Either I disappeared and forgot everything I knew, or the entire family would disappear. And in the second case, it wouldn't be voluntary. So you chose to vanish, Miguel said grimly. I had 2 hours to pack and leave the city. Javier opened his eyes, which were brimming with tears. 2 hours to decide whether I would ever see my family again. How did you leave? Miguel asked softly. I waited until Isabel left for work and Ramon went to school. I wrote a note saying I had to leave on urgent business for a few months. Took some documents, a little money, and disappeared. And you didn't even tell me. How could I? Javier stood up and walked back to the window. If you had known the truth, you would have worried. You might have gone to the police. But by then, I already knew half the local police force was on Morales' payroll. You thought you could fix it quickly? Yes. Javier laughed bitterly. I was a naive idiot. Thought I'd find honest prosecutors or journalists, tell them everything I knew, and justice would be served. Like in a Hollywood movie. But that didn't happen. Of course not. The more I dug, the deeper the rabbit hole went. Morales didn't just control construction, he had half the city administration in his pocket. Any attempt to fight him was doomed to fail and could have ended in disaster for all of us. Miguel was silent, trying to absorb everything he had just heard. All those years, he had blamed his son for being selfish and irresponsible, called him a coward who abandoned his family in their time of need. But in truth, Javier had sacrificed himself to keep them safe. Where did you live all these years? The old man finally asked. Everywhere and nowhere, Javier sighed. I constantly changed countries, identities, jobs. The first few years, I just survived doing odd work. And later? I became a security consultant for international corporations. My experience fighting corruption turned out to be valuable. Eventually, I saved enough to live comfortably. Carmen listened with growing horror. The thought of someone living in exile for 15 years, unable to contact his family, was almost unbearable. What about your personal life? She asked gently. Do you have anyone? Javier shook his head. How could I start a new family, knowing I already had one I loved more than life itself? He looked at his father. Every day for the last 15 years, I thought about you. About how Ramon was growing up, how Laura was becoming a young woman, how Isabel was grieving without me. About how I'd lost everything. And you never tried to contact us? I tried to get news. I had contacts, people who could pass along updates without revealing my location. Javier paused. I even came to Mom's funeral. Miguel sat upright, and the monitors began beeping urgently. What? You were at Elena's funeral? Yes. I flew in from Mexico the moment I heard about her illness. But I was too late, Javier's voice broke. We didn't see you. I was hiding in the grove near the cemetery. I saw all of you, Isabel, Ramon, Laura. Tears once again rolled down his cheeks. I saw you standing at the grave. I saw Ramon supporting you. I saw Isabel crying. "Oh my God," Miguel whispered. "My son. I wanted to come over, to hug you, to be there with you in that terrible moment. But Morales' people were watching me. They knew I might show up for Mom's funeral, and they were waiting. So what did you do?" "I waited until everyone had left. Then I went to her grave. I brought white roses, the kind she loved most. I laid them on the fresh soil and asked her forgiveness for not being there in her final days." "I saw those roses," Miguel whispered. "The next day, when I went to the cemetery, I couldn't figure out who had brought them. I spent an hour by her grave," Javier said softly. "I told her about my life, how much I missed you all, how I dreamed of coming home. Then I had to leave, because Morales' men made it clear that was my final warning." "So why did you come back now?" Miguel asked. "What changed?" Javier pulled a smartphone from his pocket and showed a photo from an online newspaper. And it was a man in his 60s, with a hard face and cold eyes. "Ernesto Morales died a month ago. Massive heart attack." "So now you're safe?" Miguel asked hopefully. "Not exactly," Javier said, putting the phone away. "Morales is dead, but his empire remains. It's now controlled by his former partner, Santiago Rodriguez. And he still poses a threat to our family." "Why?" "Because I've learned about Ramon's debts. And I realized that my son has fallen into his trap." "So Rodriguez is behind all of this? Is he the reason Ramon became like this?" "I came to find out the full truth. And I'll do everything I can to save my son," Javier said firmly. Carmen listened, feeling something shift inside her. Everything she thought she knew about the Oliveira family was crumbling and reforming. Ramon wasn't a cruel grandson tormenting his grandfather for money. Like his father, he was a victim of vile, manipulative men. "Senor Javier," she said quietly, "I owe you an apology. Yesterday, when your son came to see Senor Miguel, I was very harsh with him. I accused him of causing his grandfather's heart attack." "I understand," Javier replied gently. "You didn't know the circumstances. And your reaction was natural. Thank you for protecting and caring for my father. But now I realize I was unfair. Ramon is a strong young man. He'll understand and forgive." Carmen nodded. She decided she needed to apologize to Ramon. She didn't want to add to the pain and confusion he was already feeling. "But why Ramon?" Miguel asked in despair. "And why do they want our house?" Javier pulled a folder from his briefcase and spread the documents on the nightstand next to his father's bed. "Papa, I've spent the last 2 weeks investigating the situation. What I found forced me to come here immediately." "What did you discover?" Miguel tried to sit up to see the documents more clearly. "The entire scheme Santiago Rodriguez set up to take our house." Javier showed the first document, a map of the neighborhood with marked plots. "The construction company Nuevo Horizonte, the one offering to buy your house, is just a front. They want the land for something entirely different." Carmen stepped closer and leaned in to steady the map. "For what?" she asked. "See these lines beneath the house?" Javier pointed to strange, curved markings under Miguel's property. "These are old underground utility tunnels. They were built long ago to transport goods from the port to the city center." "And what's so special about that?" Miguel asked, confused. "These tunnels connect the city center to the port, completely bypassing modern customs checkpoints and security posts," Javier said, showing a more detailed map. "It's the perfect route for smuggling drugs, weapons, stolen goods." Carmen felt nausea rise in her throat. "You mean Senor Miguel's house?" "Our house is located right above the central hub of the tunnel system." Javier showed a large-scale diagram. Directly beneath the basement lies the main junction where tunnels branch out in 4 directions. Without controlling that point, the entire smuggling operation is useless. "So Ramon's debts weren't random," Carmen murmured. "Exactly. My son was ensnared deliberately. The entire debt situation was premeditated. Javier held up bank records. Look, he took out a loan to open a bar from Financial Horizons Bank. That bank is owned by Santiago's network. And then? Miguel asked tensely. When the bar failed, which it was meant to do, since Santiago orchestrated a supplier boycott, Ramon was directed to private lenders. Guess who controls them? Santiago again? Carmen said grimly. Exactly. Then they lured him into the Golden Horseshoe Casino. Javier showed ownership documents. The casino belongs to Santiago's cousin, Eduardo Rodriguez. Miguel listened with growing fury. His grandson had been used as a pawn, deliberately pushed toward desperation. So this entire nightmare was planned from the start. Santiago studied our family, discovered Ramon's dream of owning a business, and offered him help. Javier clenched his fists. The boy thinks it's his fault, that he's a failure who can't handle his debts. But in truth, he's a victim of a criminal scheme. How much does he owe now? Miguel asked quietly. 270,000. An amount no ordinary person could ever repay. Javier leaned in. Papa, Santiago gave him 3 days to resolve the house issue. If he doesn't bring the documents or the money. Then, Carmen whispered, already sensing the answer from Javier's expression. Ramon will disappear. And then the rest of the family will start disappearing, one by one, until someone breaks and signs over the house. A heavy silence fell over the room. Miguel lay with his eyes closed, trying to digest what he'd heard. His family was under threat because of the greed and cruelty of men who valued human lives as nothing. Is there a way out? He finally asked. There is. Javier pulled out another folder. But it's risky, and it will require a lot of courage from all of us. That night, Ramon couldn't sleep again. He lay on the couch in his tiny apartment. He had sold the bed a month ago to partially pay the loan interest and replayed the last few days in his mind. He was angry at the world, and most of all, at himself. By 2 a.m., his patience snapped. He couldn't take it anymore. He dressed in the same crumpled clothes he'd been wearing for 3 days and headed to his grandfather's house. In a moment of desperation, he had decided to look for signed documents and forge Miguel's signature. The house greeted him with dark windows. His grandfather was still in the hospital, the neighbors were asleep, and only the street lamps lit the empty garden. Ramon pulled the spare key from under the old terracotta pot, a hiding place the whole family knew, and quietly stepped inside. In the living room, he switched on the green-shaded desk lamp, the same one Grandma Elena had used to read him fairy tales. Everything here was steeped in memories of a happy childhood. There was the massive oak table where Grandma taught him to read and write, patiently explaining each letter. The old Bechstein piano where Grandpa would play sad melodies from his youth. Family photos in carved wooden frames hung on the walls, smiling faces from a time before they knew the trials that lay ahead. Ramon picked up a large family portrait in a silver frame, his parents on their wedding day. Young, beautiful, in love, their eyes full of hope for the future. Javier in a sharp black suit held Isabel, radiant in a lace dress, looking at him as if he were the center of her universe. Dad, Ramon whispered, touching his father's face in the photo. Where are you now? Why did you leave us? If you'd been here, maybe I wouldn't have become such a failure. I never left you, said a quiet voice from the darkness. Ramon jumped, dropping the photo. The glass shattered on the floor with a soft chime, shards scattering across the boards. His heart pounded so hard he felt it in his temples. A man stood in the doorway, tall, silver-haired, dressed in a dark, elegant suit. For a moment, Ramon thought he was hallucinating from sleep deprivation and stress, that his overworked mind was conjuring ghosts. Who are you? He whispered, backing toward the window. How did you get in? The man stepped slowly into the lamplight, and Ramon saw his face. Older, gaunt, with deep lines around the eyes, but unmistakably the face he remembered from his youth, the face he'd just seen in the photo. Hello, son, Javier said, his voice trembling with emotion. Ramon felt his world collapse and rebuild itself in an instant. This couldn't be real. His father had been dead for 15 years. His mother had told him, shown him the death certificate. "You can't be here," he whispered, pressing his back to the cold window glass. "You're dead. A car accident in Colombia. Mom showed me the papers." "Your mother believed I was dead because I wanted her to believe it," Javier said, stepping closer, moving slowly so as not to scare his son. "It was the only way to protect the family from people who wanted to kill us." "Protect?" Ramon's voice cracked with hysteria, his eyes wild. "You abandoned us. Left Mom alone with 2 kids. Disappeared when we needed you most." "Ramon." "No!" Ramon shouted, his voice a storm of long-suppressed pain, rage, and despair. "Where were you when I was 18 and didn't know how to fix the car because there was no one to teach me? Where were you when I graduated high school and had no one to invite to the ceremony?" Each question lashed out like a whip, and Javier took them in silence, never interrupting, never trying to defend himself. "Where were you when I fell in love for the first time and didn't know how to talk to girls? When I couldn't find a job? When I started gambling because I thought I could get rich fast and prove I wasn't a failure like my father, the man who ran away from his family?" The last words rang out like the cry of a wounded animal. Ramon was trembling all over, tears streaming down his cheeks, his fists clenching and unclenching. Javier was crying too, the tears on his sun-worn face glinting in the lamp's light. "I know," he said quietly, once Ramon had calmed down a little. "I know I hurt you deeply. That you grew up believing I'd betrayed you. But believe me, son, if I had had a choice." "There's always a choice," Ramon shouted, waving his arms. "There's always another way. You just didn't choose us." No, Javier took another step forward, only a meter separated them now. "I did choose you. I chose your lives and your safety, even at the cost of my own happiness, even at the cost of your hatred." Ramon looked at his father through tears, trying to understand the meaning behind his words. "What do you mean?" "Sit down, son. I need to tell you a very long and very dark story." The next hour changed everything Ramon believed about his life. Javier told him the same story he told Miguel and Carmen that morning, but this time it came as an explanation, as a justification for years of absence. "Every day for the last 15 years, I thought of you," Javier said, sitting across from his son in the armchair that had once been his favorite reading spot. "I imagined who you were becoming, what you were studying, what you dreamed about. I bought newspapers from our town whenever I could find them, searching for any news about the family. And you never tried to contact us?" "I tried. But every attempt could have been the last, for all of us." Javier pulled a worn photograph from his pocket, one of the entire family. "I carried this with me all those years. I looked at your faces every night before I slept." Ramon took the photograph in trembling hands. It had clearly been handled often, its edges were frayed and faded. "Why did you come back now?" "Because I learned about your debts. And I realized you were caught in a trap." "What kind of trap?" Javier told him about the connection between his debts and Santiago's scheme to seize the house. How he had been deliberately lured into debt through his dream of owning a business. How the entire nightmare had been orchestrated from the start. "So my whole life was a lie?" Ramon finally asked. "Mom lied to me about your death, Santiago lied about the debts being bad luck, and I lied to myself thinking I was just a loser." "Your mother didn't lie. She truly believed I was dead," Javier said, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "And as for the debts, yes, you were set up. But that doesn't mean you can't set things right." "How?" "I've got less than a day left, and Santiago doesn't forgive debts. Trust me. I have a plan." Javier pulled out his phone and showed Ramon a contact list. "In 15 years, I've built connections with very influential people in international prosecution offices, anti-corruption task forces, intelligence agencies. They've been looking for a way to get to men like Santiago for a long time. So what's your plan?" Tomorrow, you go to Santiago with the documents to sell the house. Only, the documents will be fake. While you're negotiating, the agencies will be recording everything, proof of extortion. What if he realizes the documents are fake? He won't. The forgery is flawless. Javier put the phone away. And even if he does, by the time he suspects anything, the building will already be surrounded. Ramon sat silently, trying to absorb everything. Too many shocks in one night, a resurrected father, the truth about the past, a plan for salvation. I don't get it, he finally said. Why are you risking everything for me? I grew up hating you, thinking you were a coward and a traitor. Because you're my son, Javier said simply. And because I want to make up for the time we lost. Even if it takes the rest of my life. They sat together in the dark living room, two men separated by 15 years of pain and misunderstanding, slowly learning how to be father and son again. I'm sorry you had to grow up without me, Javier said. Sorry I missed your childhood, your first love, your graduation, your acceptance to university. I'm sorry too, Ramon replied. Sorry I hated you all these years without knowing the truth. Well, now you know. And we have a chance to start over. If we survive tomorrow. We will survive, Javier said firmly. We absolutely will. The next day passed in frantic preparation. Javier met with his contacts in the prosecutor's office, a team of investigators who had long sought to bring down Santiago's organization but lacked sufficient evidence. Lead investigator Diego Vega, a namesake of the accountant murdered 15 years ago, listened closely as Javier laid out the plan. This is extremely risky, Vega said, studying the operation diagram. If Rodriguez smells a trap, your son might not make it out of that building. I understand the risks, Javier replied. But we don't have a choice. The deadline is tomorrow. All right. We'll position agents in nearby buildings, install hidden cameras and microphones. But remember, your son needs to act natural. One wrong word, and the whole thing collapses. While the operation was set in motion, Notary Maria Sanchez, the woman who had helped Javier create fake documents for his disappearance 15 years ago, was busy forging the house sale papers. This is the best forgery I've ever made, she said, showing the finished documents. Stamps, signatures, even the paper, they're all perfect copies. Thank you, Maria. I owe you. We're even, Javier. You helped me expose corruption in the notary office years ago. Now it's my turn to help you. That evening, Javier brought the documents to the hospital, where Miguel was nearly ready for discharge. The doctors were surprised by the speed of his recovery, but Carmen knew why. The joy of reuniting with his son was more powerful than any medicine. Tomorrow it ends, Javier said, showing his father the fake papers. Either we catch Santiago, or what? Miguel asked. Or we'll have to disappear. I've got contacts abroad, documents, money. We can start over in Canada or Australia. And the house? The house isn't worth our lives, Papa. Miguel nodded, understanding, though deep down he hoped it wouldn't come to that. Carmen listened quietly and thought of Ramon. She still felt guilty for the harshness of her words. Now, knowing the truth, her heart ached for the young man who bore the guilt for the crimes of others. She was eager to see him again, and deeply afraid for him. At 3 p.m., Ramon stood in front of the office building that housed Santiago's firm. In his briefcase was a folder of forged documents, a tiny transmitter was fixed to his ear, and adrenaline pulsed through his veins. Are you ready? Javier's voice came through the earpiece. Ready, Ramon nodded, walking into the building. Remember, act natural. You're a desperate debtor who finally convinced his grandfather to sell. No bravado. No overconfidence. Ramon climbed to the third floor and knocked on the door marked S. Rodriguez, Financial Services. Come in, my dear friend, Santiago greeted him as the secretary showed Ramon in. I hope you brought me good news. Ramon sat in a leather chair across from the massive desk and pulled out the folder. His hands trembled slightly, perfectly believable for someone in his situation. "Here," he said, handing over the documents. "My grandfather agreed after the heart attack. He realized he doesn't need the house anymore." Santiago leafed through the papers slowly. Ramon's stomach turned when he saw him pull out a magnifying glass to steady the seals. "Interesting," Santiago murmured. "According to the date, your grandfather signed these before his heart attack. How could that be?" Ramon's heart sank. Had the forgery failed? "Probably a date error," he mumbled. "You know how notaries are." "Oh yes, I know," Santiago smiled, putting down the magnifying glass. "I know them very well. Especially Maria Sanchez. She and I go way back." Javier's voice crackled urgently in the earpiece. "Ramon, get out. Now. It's a trap." But it was already too late. The office door opened, and two men in dark suits stepped inside. "Sit down, boy," Santiago said, pulling a pistol from his desk drawer. "We need to talk. And call your dear resurrected father. I know he's listening." "Javier Oliveira," Santiago said loudly, staring into the surveillance camera in the corner of the office. "I know you're here, in this city. I know you organized this entire operation. And I know you're listening to my every word." His voice was calm, almost friendly, and the gun in his hand didn't tremble. "You have exactly 10 minutes to come here and surrender. Otherwise, your boy gets a bullet in the knee. Then the other knee. Then the shoulder. And so on, until you show up." Ramon sat in the chair, surrounded by guards, trying not to show how terrified he was. In his earpiece, there was only static. The connection had been cut. "How did you find out?" he asked. "That your father is alive?" Santiago laughed. "My dear boy, we've been watching him for all 15 years. Did you really think a man like that could just vanish? He has habits, weaknesses, contacts. But Morales is dead." "Morales was my partner, not my boss," Santiago said, lighting a cigar. "When he died, I inherited not just his business, but also his enemies. Your father is one of them. And what do you want?" "Justice. 15 years ago, Javier stole documents that could put half the government behind bars. We want them back." "What documents?" "The ones Accountant Carlos Vega gathered before he was killed. Your father copied them before he disappeared." At that moment, the door opened, and Javier stepped inside. He looked calm, but Ramon noticed the tremble in his hands. "Let my son go," Javier said, looking directly at Santiago. "This is between you and me." "Of course, I'll let him go," Rodriguez smiled. "As soon as you give me what I want. The documents were destroyed years ago." "Lies. You're too smart to destroy your only insurance. They're somewhere, and you'll give them to me." Javier slowly approached the desk. "All right. Have it your way. The documents are hidden in a Swiss safety deposit box. I have the key." "Show me." Javier reached into his inner jacket pocket, but instead of a key, he pulled out a small transmitter. "Operation Justice. Commence breach," he said into the microphone. Santiago had no time to react. The office door was blown off its hinges, and special forces in black tactical gear stormed in. "Drop your weapon. Hands on your head." There was no shootout. Santiago's guards surrendered immediately, realizing resistance was futile. Santiago tried to fire at Javier, but a sniper in a neighboring building was faster. An hour later, it was over. Santiago was arrested along with his men. Documents and computers with evidence of criminal activity were seized. Ramon sat in an ambulance, not because he was wounded, but due to the shock of everything that had happened. "How did you know it was a trap?" he asked his father. "Maria Sanchez warned me," Javier replied. It turns out Santiago had long suspected her connection to me and was watching her every move. "And the documents Carlos Vega collected? They're real. And they really are in a Swiss bank. Javier smiled. Tomorrow they'll be handed over to the International Court. Half the corrupt officials in our country will be behind bars. And my debts? Cancelled. You're officially free from all obligations. Ramon closed his eyes and, for the first time in many months, felt relief. The nightmare was over. When they arrived at the hospital where Miguel was still recovering, they were greeted by Carmen, who rushed over and threw her arms around Ramon. I was so scared, she whispered. When they said on the radio there was a shootout downtown. It's all right, Ramon said, surprised by her reaction. Just days ago, she had nearly shouted at him. Now she looked at him with a guilty smile and a gaze filled with compassion and admiration. Ramon, Carmen said, looking into his eyes. I owe you an apology for what I said yesterday. I didn't know the truth. You were protecting my grandfather, Ramon interrupted. You did what you thought was right. No need to apologize. I'm grateful you were there for him when I wasn't myself. But I was unfair. I blamed you for something that wasn't your fault. Maybe. But I still shouldn't have said those cruel things to Grandpa. Ramon sighed heavily. Carmen could see he deeply regretted what he had done. She took his hand and smiled. You need to forgive yourself. Miguel already has. Ramon looked up and saw the warmth in her eyes, and it made his heart beat faster. Carmen, he said, gathering his courage. When all of this is finally over, maybe we could go somewhere. Just the two of us? Yes, she smiled. Of course, yes. In the hospital room, Miguel was waiting, more worried about his family than his own health. Seeing his son and grandson alive and well, he burst into tears of joy. We're together again, he said. For the first time in 15 years. The next day, Isabel joined them. Seeing her husband alive was such a shock that doctors feared for her mental state. But love proved stronger than illness. For the first time in years, her manic and depressive episodes receded. I waited so long for you, she wept in Javier's arms. I always hoped you'd come back. I'm here now, he promised. And nothing will tear us apart again. A week later, Laura arrived from America. At first, she couldn't believe her father was alive, and even longer, she couldn't forgive him for the years of silence. But over time, the family began to heal, learning how to be together once more. A week after his discharge, Miguel returned home. But it wasn't met with silence and loneliness. Instead, it echoed with the voices of his family. Isabel cooked in the kitchen using Elena's old recipes. Javier was restoring the flower beds in the garden. Ramon and Carmen chatted in the living room. Javier quickly found a job. His anti-corruption expertise was in high demand. The new government offered him a role in the anti-corruption committee, and he accepted, knowing it was his true calling. Ramon began an internship at a firm specializing in helping victims of financial fraud. His personal story made him relatable. Clients trusted him with their pain. He rose quickly through the ranks, much to his own surprise and satisfaction. And Carmen. Carmen became the heart of the new family, the thread that wove everyone together. She helped Isabel find a good psychiatrist, supported Miguel during his recovery, and built a relationship with Ramon based on mutual respect and understanding. You know, Ramon said one evening as they sat in his grandfather's garden surrounded by blooming roses. I thought I had lost everything. My family, my home, my future. But it turns out, I gained more than I lost. What did you gain? Carmen asked with a smile. A father I thought was dead. The understanding that not all my failures were my fault. And you. Carmen gently took his hand. And I gained a family I never had, she said. Your grandfather feels like a father to me, your mother like an older sister, and your father like a guardian and mentor. What about me? You've become the man I can love and respect. Something truly special had grown between them, first mutual respect and empathy, born of shared hardship, and then a tender affection that promised to become true love. They were married in the spring, when the white roses bloomed again. It was a modest, joyful wedding. Miguel walked Carmen down the aisle, taking the place of the parents she had lost in a car accident. Javier was Ramon's best man. 2 years later, the Oliveira house rang with the sound of children's laughter. Little Elena took her first steps along the garden paths once laid by her great-grandparents. Miguel sat on the veranda, watching his great-granddaughter play among the flowers. Beside him was a pregnant Carmen. Their second child was due in the fall. "What are you thinking, Grandpa?" she asked, noticing the thoughtful look on his face. "About how strange life is," Miguel replied. "Sometimes it feels like you've lost the meaning of it all, but then you find it again. And find your family again, too." "I'm so glad we found each other," Carmen said. "You know what Elena would say if she were here?" "What?" "That all flowers eventually find their soil and bloom." They sat in silence, watching the sunset, bathing the old house in a soft, rosy light. They had almost lost it, but now it was full again. The garden bloomed with every kind of rose, white for Elena's memory, red for the passion of Javier and Isabel, and pink for the new love between Ramon and Carmen. And somewhere beneath the roots of the old apple tree lay a time capsule, buried by Miguel and Elena on their silver anniversary. And it were letters with dreams of the future, family photos, and a note that read, "May our children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren be happy in this home." And so it was. The Oliveira family had survived trials that could have destroyed them, but they endured because they understood the most important truth. A home is not walls and a roof. It's the people who love one another. And as long as that love lived, nothing could truly threaten them. "Thank you, Elena," Miguel whispered, gazing at the stars one by one lighting up the sky. "Thank you for teaching me to believe in better days. Your family is home again." If you liked the video, please support it with a like and a comment.